I'm going to take this Trek 9000 from 1992, take it for a ride and see how it compares to its modern day equivalent. So back in 1992, this was one of the very first mass-produced full suspension bikes. And actually thinking about it, that's pretty crazy really. We were building Spitfires in 1944, but it took us till 1992 to build a full suspension mountain bike. But I guess it was early days in the sport. It's a really simple suspension design. It's a single pivot, and this swing arm, it's called the T3C swing arm. It's aluminium. And let's have a look at the actual Trek manual from 1992. And it says by compressing the shock, call it a shock, it's actually an elastomer, so it's a really simple design, absolutely no damping on there. Well, by compressing that 3/4 of an inch, that means the rear end will travel an incredible 2.75 inches, and that is about 70 millimeters. Up front, we've actually got this Trek DD-S3 fork, and this was made by Showa. Manufacturers are really famous for making motorcycle forks, so it's actually pretty cool to see. And it is actually fairly advanced for the time, but the catalogue says up front the new Trek DD-S3 suspension fork boasts 1.8 inches of travel. I wouldn't boast about that, to be honest, but that is 45 millimeters. All joking aside, this suspension fork actually was really advanced for the time. It's got adjustable spring rate, adjustable damping, but you can also adjust the progressive rate of this using a shock pump. And that's something that 25 years later, people like RockShox and Fox are making a really big fuss about. So for its day, it was really advanced. It's an aluminium frame, it even tells you on there, and it even says function specific design. That's pretty forward thinking. It's got a whopping great stem on it, 135mm, and the bars are 560mm wide. Lots of other technology that's common back in the day. Cantilever brakes, quick releases, and it's got 21 gears. The dual suspension 9000 series, all the thrill you can handle on a bike made to handle it all. Well, I think I'll be the judge of that. I've never ridden one before, but they do have a reputation for being pretty awful. But first, let's take a look at the modern bike. So this bike is probably the nearest to a modern day equivalent. It's a Canyon Lux CF carbon fiber cross-country bike. It's 100mm travel front and rear, which is pretty much the shortest travel full suspension bike you can get nowadays. Compare that to the 70 on the rear and 45 up front on the Trek. So what else is the same about these two bikes? Well, the hub width and the tyres are made of rubber. Right, so first impressions, I guess geometry is the most noticeable thing. It feels really stretched out. You've got this massive stem, 135mm. I've also got a laid back seat post on there, so riding downhill feels pretty damn terrible on it. If you actually look at the figures, the head angle is actually really similar to the Canyon. This is 71 degrees. The Canyon Lux is only 1 degree slacker at 70, but the biggest difference is top tube length. The Canyon is actually 35mm longer. So it's got a much longer top tube and a shorter stem, makes it feel much more nimble and actually much less scary. So to the suspension, it definitely feels pretty primitive. The rear shock, that's just this rubber elastomer, and it's got no damping on it at all, so it just tops out. So you press into compression or something, and it just bounces straight back out, and you feel that clunk as it almost sort of tops out on you. So it does some work, but on the downhills it's not brilliant. On the climbs it feels pretty terrible, to be honest. It just bobs around and bucks so much so that it almost feels at the bottom of every pedal stroke the bike just pops a little bit. Back when these first full suspension bikes came out, they were really designed to almost pedal like hardtails. That was the idea. No one really wanted the suspension sucking up your power, but it really doesn't do what it was intended to do. It just bobs around all over the place. The fork doesn't feel too bad. There is some horrendous clunking coming from the front of it, and I actually think it's just because I'm bottoming out. You can see halfway up the stanchion that sort of mark, and that is the 45mm mark. So I'm just using all the travel straight away, but it does actually kind of work. You may notice I'm on flat pedals on this bike, and that's because I couldn't get these ones off. They've probably been on there for 20 years. And that just adds to the extra sketchiness of this bike, and it's pretty terrifying. Cantilever brakes were pretty awful at the best of times. In the wet like today, they're almost useless. You could look at all that brake block that's just left on the rim. Don't really do much. V-brakes came on later in the 90s and they were much better, but no match for the disc brakes on a modern bike. So just how bad is a 25-year-old mountain bike? Well, to be honest, it's not great. Although that is kind of unfair because this bike was actually notoriously bad for one of those early bikes. You're probably better off with a hardtail, to be honest. That rear suspension is so flawed on this bike. There have been loads of small incremental improvements over the years, of course, and then some bigger ones like suspension, brakes, geometry, that just make the new bike so much more capable. Much more like it. Let's go for a ride. So you just forget how good we've got it, to be honest. Jumping on this bike, I mean, it's only 100 travel, it's a cross-country marathon race bike, but it just feels so good on the downhills. The suspension feels amazing, so well damped, so plush. Like I say, it's only 100 things like the brakes, they just work really well, one finger braking, and I've got so much more grip on this bike. And then there's the little things like the hydraulic lockout on the suspension, little push of a button, and away I go up the climb, super efficient. So all in all, it's a much better bike. It just makes me wonder how good bikes will be in the next 25 years. Click on the GMBN logo here to subscribe to the channel, it's totally free. And if you click down there, that'll take you through to a retro versus modern cross-country race. And click over there for another retro video where I ride a Proflex 957. Give us a thumbs up if you like retro videos. GMBN is back with the retro content. Today, I'm going to take this Trek 9000 from 1992, take it for a ride and see how it compares to its modern day equivalent. So back in 1992, this was one of the very first mass-produced full suspension bikes. And actually thinking about it, that's pretty crazy really. We were building Spitfires in 1944, but it took us till 1992 to build a full suspension mountain bike. But I guess it was early days in the sport. It's a really simple suspension design. It's a single pivot, and this swing arm, it's called the T3